Hello everyone, my name is Damien and I'm here today to give a speech about one of my favorite things, which is the banjo. The title of my speech is The Big, Bold, Beautiful Banjo. And I'm here to tell you about a few things about it. First, my experience in the banjo, where it came from. It's a bit of a strange instrument. Second, I'm here to explain a few things about it, specifically as an instrument, what makes it different, what makes it weird. The first of those is where it came from, the history of the banjo. The history from originally where it first was born, how it got to the United States second, and then how it eventually progressed to where it is in modernity in the United States. The second thing is to explain the anatomy of the banjo, which types of modern banjos there are. They are very different, and what music they're used for. And then finally, the third thing I'm going to explain to you is which bands now utilize it and in which types of music the banjo is used. So to start with, first here what we have is the banjo started as an instrument called the banjar. It came from Africa, as many of our musical instruments did. It's not exactly a clear origin as to where in Africa. People say it's East Africa, somewhere around Cote d'Ivoire. It is clear that it came to the United States around 1600. Somewhere in the mid-1600s is among the earliest recorded history of the banjar in the United States. It originated as a slave instrument. And essentially what the banjar was is different than the banjo is. It was a gourd, which looks essentially like that. And the way that it was made, cut the gourd in half, and then stretch a calf skin or a goat skin over the top of that, creating a membrane. The stick was added, along with strings, 4 of them in the early case, to produce sound. It's very different than some of the earlier instruments like a lute or similar, which have a sound hole for acoustics. So, the way that it started to evolve in the United States was, again, it was a slave instrument. It was used that way for a number of years, actually nearly 200 years in this case. And in the pre-Civil War days, it was first adopted by a man named Joel Walker Sweeney. And Joel Walker Sweeney was a minstrel show performer. Not exactly a wonderful history in this particular case for the banjo. He performed in blackface. It was just short of the Civil War, around 1837, that this was noted to happen. He added a 5th string to the banjo, which made it a little bit different than what it had sounded like typically up until that time. And slowly, throughout that 200 years that I mentioned just a minute ago, the banjo had been adapted. Instead of gourds, it was adapted with wood, with tone rings, metal, essentially a more modern instrument than it is today. So following the minstrel show era, the banjo started to gain popularity. It started to get popular with popular music, in this case, and indeed jazz and some of the other things throughout the 1920s. And this is where the second critical reinventor of the banjo comes in. You may have heard of Earl Scruggs. He is the most famous banjo player that has ever existed. He essentially completely redefined the banjo. He played it in a way that nobody had ever played it up until that time, and he added a new component to the banjo called a resonator that makes it a very loud, obnoxious instrument that you hear today. It was very different than it used to be. Up until that time, all banjos, except for the early banjars, had an open back. So this wasn't here. It was just an open back with a membrane on the front. So that brings me to my second point, which is banjos and modernity. This open back has remained one of the 2 major styles of banjo to this day. The other style is the Earl Scruggs style that he adapted, which you can see in this picture, and I'll show you a real example in just a minute, that has a resonator on the back of it. So this here is a resonator, and I'm going to explain some of the main points of this banjo. This is a plastic mylar head. It's basically a drum head that is essentially stretched to give tone over the top of the banjo. Some of the other components here, you've got a tone ring, which is made of brass, very similar to a lot of bells. You've got a neck and you've got a peg head. Now, some of the stranger things about the banjo, I'm going to hold this because it's about 30 pounds, but it's heavy. It has 5 strings, of which one of these strings is shorter and mounted on the neck. It's a little unusual. From a guitar background, I played guitar for nearly 10 years before I ever picked up a banjo. Guitar has 6 strings, they're all the same length, it's normal, it's traditionally tuned. That is a more normal instrument than the banjo is. What makes the banjo weird is, again, this 5th string here that runs halfway up the neck, and that's it. It's also tuned the same as the top string. The banjo is tuned to an open chord. It is a G chord naturally, which makes it have a real nice sound from the get-go. You don't have to mess with anything. It also means that chords can stay the same all the way up the neck. It is a nice feature of the banjo. It makes it a little bit easier when you're first starting to play to sound a lot better than you actually are. So that is helpful. So what separates the open back style of banjo from this style of banjo is mainly how they're played. And that's thanks to this man, Earl Scruggs. Earl Scruggs believed in what's called bluegrass banjo, which is a finger-picking style of banjo that didn't exist prior to him picking up the instrument. It's very different than the claw hammer, which is the other style of banjo. Claw hammer is the more rhythmic style that had been around traditionally, starting with the banjar, evolving all the way through. It is rhythmic, it has a thumb note, it's very different than what bluegrass banjo eventually became. So I'm here to demonstrate a couple things real quick. First is, it'll be less than 10 seconds, a piece that I've written just real quick with bluegrass style. So that's a short excerpt of that. That's finger picking. That is the bluegrass style of banjo. You'll hear that very commonly now. A lot of people use finger picks. I can't stand not feeling the strings. The other style is the older style, the claw hammer style, and in my opinion it's actually much prettier when it's done well. And that goes a little like this. So what you have the differences there. First, one is finger picking at the beginning, that's the bluegrass style. The claw hammer style has more of a rhythmic womp to it, and there's upstrokes throughout the thing. It's meant to mimic a drum beat. So you're picking up a rhythm off from that drum head more than you normally would. So finally, my last point here that I'm going to talk to you about is which bands use the banjo currently and how it's used. Bluegrass is the primary bastion for banjo. And not many people anymore listen to bluegrass, which is a bit unfortunate in my opinion, but I'm here to tell you about the banjo, not convince you about it. So there aren't many bluegrass bands that are hitting the charts these days outside of Nashville. However, country music does utilize the banjo quite a bit. It just doesn't use it as a lead instrument. It uses it for background, it uses it for chords. It really adds a folksy feel to the music instead of being, you'll never hear a banjo solo on country music now. That's changed a lot from where it used to be. In addition to those two types, the banjo is starting to take hold in alternative music. Some of you probably heard of Mumford & Sons. I'm not a big fan of the band personally, but they do utilize the banjo quite a bit. There's another band called Gomez, and finally one called Trampled by Turtles that kind of crosses into an indie realm of music. That's where it's kind of evolved at this point. And in closing, I have been here today to explain to you a little bit about my favorite instrument, hopefully educate you some about what to listen for in the future if you do ever listen to banjo music, and recognize what it is and how it's made. Thank you.